Have a seat. Good morning. Happy Easter to you. And thank you to our worship team for planning such a memorable service for us. We want to glorify Jesus on Easter morning. That's why we're here. And I appreciate that all of their songs did that. I want to start with a question. And it's a question that seems like it has an obvious answer. On one hand, it does have an obvious answer, but I think there's some other things at play as well. The question is, why are we all here on Easter Sunday? And by all here, what I mean is we'll have more people this Sunday than any other Sunday of the year, and it's not even close. Like hands down, like no competition. We're anticipated to have twice as many people here this Sunday as we had last Sunday. And we'll have twice as many people here this Sunday as we'll probably have next Sunday. And that's true all over our city. That's true all over our nation. We added an extra service just because we thought if we keep our regular service times, we won't have room for everybody. And there's a dozen other churches in our city that added extra services that they won't need next week. But why is that? Like, why are we all here on this one Sunday? Why does everybody get dressed up and come to church on Easter Sunday? And I have a few theories as to why. One of them is not really a theory. It's something that I believe on faith. But the first reason is that Easter is the biggest event on the Christian calendar. Without Easter, there is no Christian calendar. Without Easter, there is no Christianity. And I'm not trying to overstate that. That's what the Bible says. If Jesus did not raise from the dead, then there is no such thing as the Christian faith. None of us are sitting here this morning worshiping Jesus if he did not raise from the dead. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul says if there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. So if there is no resurrection, then Jesus is still in his grave. And if Jesus is still in his grave, then we are still in ours. What I'm saying is there's no hope of eternal life without the resurrection. There's no hope for those we mourn without the resurrection. The resurrection is how Jesus defeated death. We receive forgiveness through his act of sacrifice upon the cross. We receive victory over death through the resurrection. The resurrection also confirms that everything he did and everything he said is true. Because if he truly rose from the grave, then he is who he said he was. He is the Son of God. And so the resurrection tells us that Jesus is more than a good teacher. He's more than a prophet. He's more than a miracle worker. He's more than a martyr. He was and is the unique Son of God. And we believe that to be true because he was indeed raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And that word first fruits indicates that Jesus' resurrection is the first resurrection. There will be many more resurrections to come. So that's talking about the hope of eternal life. We live in the hope of a future resurrection. People who we love who have died before us, we live in the hope of a future resurrection that we will be resurrected in a new heavens and a new earth to live with Jesus forever. So that's the number one reason we're all here on Sunday, because it's the biggest Sunday of the year. But there's some other reasons I think at play as well. One of them is a cultural reason, and that is that our culture still respects Easter Sunday. Our culture doesn't really respect the rest of the Sundays. The rest of the Sunday's the second day of the weekend. But on Easter Sunday, there's not a lot planned. Like we clear the calendar on Easter Sunday. There's not a lot of big ball games today that I'm aware of. There's no little leagues. There's no travel ball. There's no not a lot of vacations on Easter weekend. Like Easter, we don't have a whole lot of competition for our attention, so it's much easier to come to church on Easter because our culture still says this is worth doing. And I'm thankful that we do that. The third reason is a family reason. And many of us grew up in families with a pretty deep tradition in church, and no matter how much we go to church the rest of the year, we are going to get up on Easter Sunday and put on our pastel pants and show up for church. Because grandmama would roll over in her grave if she thought we were skipping church on Easter Sunday. And thank God for grandmas like that, right? And thank God for grandfathers like that who instilled in us a tradition that said we're going to go to church on Easter Sunday and we're going to worship Jesus because of what he did for us. There's a fourth reason that I no longer really think is true, but I used to think it was true. When I was a younger preacher, I thought, well, one of the reasons our attendance doubles on Easter Sunday is our people are just really good at inviting people, and our ad campaign is just really strong on Easter. You know, like we would put banners out at the road, and we'd give out cards and say, make sure you invite people on Easter Sunday. And we would do all this stuff, and I thought, you know, if we had 700 last Sunday and we have 1,400 this Sunday, well, it's because those 700 brought a friend with them. And so look how good we are at inviting people. And I don't really think that's it. And now we have some guests today, and we're thankful that you're with us today. But what I really think is happening on Easter Sunday, for all the reasons that I just mentioned, is that Easter is the one Sunday out of the year that every single person with any connection to our church, whether it's really strong connection, really loose connection, every single person with any connection to this church, we all show up on the same weekend. Like it's the one time out of the year, and it only happens once a year. Like the rest of the Sundays, it doesn't happen because we got different work schedules, we got different travel schedules, we got different vacation schedules and all this stuff. But this one Sunday, everybody shows up on this one Sunday. And that will mess with a preacher's mind. I'm just being honest with you. Because it feels like there's more pressure on this message than there are the rest of the messages. Because when I started writing it on Monday morning, I'm thinking, if you had a Sunday that everybody showed up at the same time, what would you say? I mean, what an incredible opportunity. We're all here at the same time. So if we're all here together at this same time, what would you say? What would you talk about on the one time we're all here together? And I know the obvious answer is, well, Jesus. And we are going to talk about Jesus. But the reason we're here is because we believe in Jesus. So I was kind of thinking of it like, what's the one thing that we could do that if we could do this in our lives, it would help us grow closer to Jesus? Or this is the one thing we could do that would help us deepen our faith. If we participated in this one thing, and I was thinking of it from not just a church perspective, but like a cultural perspective. Like if everybody from our culture showed up one Sunday to hear a message, what's the one thing right now I'd want them to hear? And if you've been following along, we've been in a series called Cultural Crossroads. We've been asking a question in the last 3 weeks, like why are we so divided as a culture right now and as a society? Like why is everybody at each other's throat and everything's so polarizing? And we've kind of been looking through, well, it has something to do with the rise of fear on traditional media and social media. It has to do with the demonization of our enemies. Everybody who disagrees with us is our enemy. It has to do with the glorification or deification of our politics. And the one thing we haven't talked about yet is it has something to do with the loss of community. And I actually think the loss of community might be one of the biggest reasons. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to explain the problem. I want to provide one solution to it, and then we'll all go eat Easter dinner together, okay? Not together. You can't all fit in my house. But I want to describe the problem. And to describe the problem, I'm going to let Bob do it. And you say, who's Bob? Watch this.
This is Bob. Bob's a big fan of clubs.
I belong to everything. That's my high school bowling team. I'm the tall one in the middle.
And this is a film about why you should join one, and how Bob discovered that the fate of America depends on it.
Harvard professor and award-winning writer Robert Putnam.
You've been described as the poet laureate of civil society.
Robert D. Putnam, for deepening our understanding of community in America.
He made people pay attention to a concept that most people had never paid attention to.
Social capital. Social capital. Social capital. Social networks have value.
I'd like to call on Professor Robert Putnam, who gave us the concept of social capital.
The number of people who know one another's first name, the number of people who take part in community organizations, the level of trust and reciprocity in the community.
The places that have better government are the places that have a long history of social networks and social capital.
Your chances of dying over the next year are cut in half by joining one group.
Bowling Alone. Where'd you get the title?
I happened to run into a friend who owned a bowling alley, and he said, gosh, Bob, you don't know it, but you've stumbled onto the major economic problems facing my industry, because although more Americans are bowling than ever before, bowling is up in America. Bowling in leagues, bowling in teams is off by about 60%. Everything that reflects connections with other people are going down. How many times last year did you go to church?
Down.
How many times did you go to a dinner party?
Down.
How many times last year did you go to a club meeting? In barely a couple of decades, half all the civic infrastructure in America had simply vanished. It's equivalent to saying half of all the roads in America just disappeared.
Everyone has a feeling something's happening, but then he's got charts to actually show what's actually happening.
Whatever's happening to people's sense of mutual obligation, to their understanding about the common good, to their willingness to trust their neighbor, is no longer going on because people are bowling alone.
The book Bowling Alone, which you're familiar with, by Robert Putnam.
The activity may still be going on, but there's no social capital being built.
That decreases the trust we have in one another. How lonely Americans are, how divided.
You know, he may have been on to something.
We have to see loneliness as a threat
to our health security and to our overall national security.
We are trying something that hasn't been done before, which is growing and sustaining a multiracial democracy.
Politics and policy ultimately depends on the social health of our country.
Organization, connections with other people is the only way you get big change.
Democracy is a pain in the ass. If it was just easy, no one would have to go to a meeting and it would all just be fair and easy. You should join, your kids should join, and if there's not an organization you want to join, create one.
America doesn't have to be the kind of America that you've lived in your whole life. You could decide to change history.
So that's a documentary on Netflix right now. You got about 2 weeks to watch it. I think it goes off on April 17th. And in full disclosure, I haven't watched all of it. But I watched enough of it to get the gist of the problem. And he's talking about a book that he wrote 25 years ago. So his thesis 25 years ago was this: Americans are participating in less community than ever before, embodied community. Like we don't go to church as much as we used to. We don't join civic clubs as much as we used to. We don't host dinner parties at our homes as much as we used to. We don't go to coffee with friends as much as we used to. We don't sit on our front porch and talk to our neighbors as much as we used to. So America's participation in community is going down. And as it goes down, you're seeing a spike in anxiety and isolation and loneliness and mistrust and polarization between people, because we're not spending time with each other in relationship. And he wrote that 25 years ago, which tells you that his thesis has only gotten worse in that time frame. And when he wrote it, he was saying one of the big issues, one of the big reasons we're not spending time together is we're not spending enough time on our front porch, we're spending more time on our screens. Which screen was he talking about in 1995 or 98 or whenever he wrote that? He was talking about the TV screen. He famously quipped, watching Friends is not the same as having friends. Think about what has happened since that show was on the air that has affected our friendships. We have since added smartphones to the mix. We added social media to the mix, and we've added artificial intelligence, all of which have decreased our participation in social networks even more, not even talking about what happened during the pandemic. There was a book I preached on a couple of years ago. It was a book written by an atheist. And you're like, what are you doing preaching about a book written by an atheist? Well, he said something that's really true, and we need to acknowledge it. What he said that was true was the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And he was talking about what happens to this, what Robert Putnam was talking about. Hyatt's saying, what happens when that applies to our children? What happens when they don't grow up with a play-based childhood, but they grow up with a phone-based childhood? This is what it cost us. What happens when they don't grow up with embodied community, they grow up with virtual community, and this is what it cost us. That's not just a generational problem. That is a societal problem. And we see evidence all throughout. We feel evidence of it. Many of us feel it. Like I feel it in my life. I feel it. I don't have as many connections as I used to. I don't have as many deep friendships as I used to. So we feel that in our lives. And I think the church has one of the answers for it. And I'm not trying to exaggerate here. I know preachers tend to oversell things. I totally understand that. I don't think the church has an answer for everything. I don't think we can fix global politics or cure cancer or any of those things. But when we talk about the decline in community, the church has one of the answers, because this is why church exists. This is what church does. This is in our name. If you go back and study the word church, it comes from a German word, Kirche. And I don't know if I'm saying it right, so if you're German, please come see me after services and you can correct me. But it's a German word that can mean building or congregation. But that's not the word that Jesus used when he talked about establishing his church. He used a Greek word, ekklesia. Ekklesia means the gathering or the people. So when Jesus talked about establishing his church, he was talking about, I'm establishing my gathering. I'm establishing my community who are going to live out my principles and values after I ascend into heaven. And we need that ekklesia. We need that gathering. I got to thinking about it reading stories of the resurrection. Owen chose Luke 24. That's exactly the version that I was reading, was Luke 24, because it's one of my favorite stories of the resurrection. And you know the story. It's when the women go to the tomb. Jesus was buried in a borrowed tomb. Joseph of Arimathea borrowed a tomb and put Jesus' body in there. And the women have prepared spices, and they're going to take care of the body. And when they arrive, the tomb is empty. And an angel of the Lord tells them, he's not here, he is risen. What's the first thing they do? In verse 9, it says, they came back from the tomb. They told all these things to the 11. and to all the others, and it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others who were with them, and they told this to the apostles. So in other words, all the believers of Jesus were together after the cross. They initially scattered, if you read the story. They initially scattered, but they all came back together. And they're scared, and they're confused, and they're anxious, and they don't know what's going to happen, but they're experiencing those feelings together, not alone. And the reason they're together is because this is what Jesus established with them when he established his ministry. The first thing Jesus did when he launched his public ministry, the first thing he did was called 12 apostles. And it was this diverse group of tax collectors, zealots, laborers, fishermen, this diverse group of apostles. And he said, you guys are going to help me usher in the kingdom. He also called a lot of women disciples, and we read about them right there. And then he did everything with them together in community. They traveled together in community. They worshiped together in community. He taught them in community. They ate together in community. Like the Gospel of Luke goes to great pains to show how often Jesus had meals with other people. Table fellowship is one of the closest forms of fellowship. And Jesus did it all the time, not just with his disciples. He did it with well-known sinners. It got him in a lot of trouble because he would have dinners with quote-unquote well-known sinners. And he did it with the so-called self-righteous that were out to get him, out to take his life. He sat down and had meals with them too. Matter of fact, if you look at the resurrection, I didn't think of this really till Owen was given his communion meditation. When Jesus revealed himself after his resurrection, he nearly always did it in community, to groups of people. It's that quote there at the end of chapter 24, that it wasn't until they were breaking bread together at the meal that they saw, this is Jesus. He revealed himself in community. And that's because Jesus came to establish a community of people. And he did that before his death, and after his death, he then established what we call the church, or the ecclesia. And if you follow Luke's story, Luke makes great pains to show this all throughout his gospel. Luke wrote a second book called Acts. And Acts is the story of the New Testament church. And right after the day of Pentecost, Peter gets up and preaches that Jesus died and was buried and on the third day rose again. And then thousands of people are baptized into Jesus, and they begin meeting together. And so Luke writes a description of this at the end of chapter 2. This is his description of the first church. Now, I know it's not going to sound like modern church, but this is the description of the first church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I want to be a part of that too. I mean, that's what we want. We need a people. We need to be together with people. And the New Testament, all through this, the rest of the New Testament, there's the first 4 books are the Gospels. They tell the story of Jesus. The next book is the history of the early church. And every book after that are letters written to groups of people who are trying to follow Jesus. So they're letters written to the church. And there's over 95 one another commands in those letters. Like encourage one another, love one another, serve one another, be patient with one another, celebrate with one another, rejoice with one another, mourn with one another. Don't give up meeting together with one another. The New Testament is very clear that we are created for community and that we need community. And that was Robert Putnam's thesis. Social capital is what they called it in the documentary. And I'm like, that wasn't Robert's idea, that was Jesus' idea. Jesus was the one that first introduced the idea of we need one another, right? And same thing with Jonathan Haidt. That wasn't his idea. That Jesus way ahead of both of them. Jesus did not rise from the dead so that we could have the hope of eternal life at some point in the future, but live as isolated individuals until then. He rose from the dead so that we could experience life together now. We could experience what we call believing and belonging. Those two things go together. And the reason I say the church doesn't look like this a lot is because a lot of you feel like, I want that, but I don't feel like I can belong in the church. I don't feel like I fit in the church. And there's kind of culturally, there's a trend. He used the bowling analogy, Putnam did. He said, participation in bowling is going up, but participation in bowling leagues is going down. And that pretty much describes the faith of America right now. Belief in Jesus is going up. There's a lot of people believe in Jesus, but participation in faith communities is going down. And it's because we've tried to separate this concept of believing and belonging. What we say is, I can believe, but I don't really need to belong. I mean, why do I need to belong to a group of people in order to believe? I can do this by myself. I was reading a story about, it was a 67-year-old woman. That's obviously not a 67-year-old woman. I couldn't find any non-copyrighted images of a 67-year-old scrolling her phone. But it fits. What she was saying was, I believe in Jesus, but I don't really need a structured faith community. I just kind of do it through my phone. And there was an interviewer asking her the questions like, well, how do you feed yourself, if you will, spiritually? And she's like, well, I just, God and I got our own little thing. And I download some podcasts of a pastor I like, and I put some worship music on my playlist, and I'm good. I don't need people to do that. Me and Jesus got our own little thing. And I want to push back on it just a little, okay? And I want to do it gently because I know I'm entering into an area that a lot of us have some trauma when it comes to church, right? A lot of us have been hurt by church and have been a part of maybe some dysfunctional churches or some leadership that abuse their power, those kind of things. And so I understand there's all kind of reasons that people don't go to church anymore. And people say, I don't really want anything to do with the faith community. I'd rather stick with my phone. I don't want to be in a group of people standing and worshiping. I'd just rather stick with my phone. And I understand that. I totally get that. But I think one of the reasons that we don't want to do it is because we just don't want to deal with the hassle and the discomfort and the awkwardness of community. Because community is always a bit of a hassle and a bit uncomfortable and a bit awkward. Like online faith is fast and frictionless. I can listen to only the guys that I agree with. I can listen to only the music that I want to hear. And I don't ever have anybody pushing me in a different direction. I don't ever everybody say anything that bothers me. And so that's like, why would I do that? Why would I show up in a faith community when I got all the content I need on YouTube? I mean, you're streaming it right now. You're giving me the content I need. Why would I bother? Why would I submit myself to a religious community when I know I'm not going to agree with everything they do? I know I'm not going to agree with everything they say. And I know I'm not going to agree with all the people in there. It's a whole lot easier for me just to do my own thing online. Well, here's what I'd say in response to that. One is, if you do follow Jesus, then you owe it to yourself to at least check out what he created. Because the church was his idea. So when Jesus ascended into heaven, when he was resurrected and ascended into heaven, he told his disciples, these people who are gathered that we were talking about, he told them, you're going to be my witnesses, and you're going to tell other people that I was raised from the dead. And I think Jesus established the church in that way because what Jesus is asking us to do is not easy. I want you to humble yourself. I want you to take up your cross daily and follow me. I want you to serve others. I want you to put yourself last. That stuff's not easy to do. I need a community of people to do that with. Because there's going to be some days that I don't feel like doing that. I need people to walk with me in that, to encourage me there. And so I think it's one of the reasons Jesus established the church. But I also think, and I say this often at Murray Hill, so those of you that come quite a bit, you've heard this before, all right? But I'm going to repeat it. I also think that one of the values of church is we are formed spiritually by being in community with other imperfect people. Like one of the ways that we learn to love is by worshiping together with people who are sometimes hard to love. And sometimes you're hard to love. And sometimes I'm hard to love. Okay? So one of the ways that we learn patience is by being in community with people who sometimes test our patience. One of the ways that we learn grace is by being in community with people who need some extra grace. Because sometimes I need some extra grace. That's one of the ways we learn faithfulness. And so if you've got a church that you go to that's trying to practice good faith, and they don't practice it perfectly, and they've got a worship leader that you like most of the songs she sings, but every now and then she sings one, you get in the car on the way to lunch, and you go, I really wish we wouldn't sing that song. I just don't like that song. I just wish you would take that one out. I wish we'd do some more hymns every now and then. And the drums, I could do without the drums. Or you got a church where you got a preacher, and you get in the car, and you're headed to lunch, and you go, I like him most of the time, but today, I wish he wouldn't talk about that stuff. Why does he got to get off into that stuff? He gets off into some stuff he shouldn't be getting into sometimes. And I just disagree with him on that. If you got people you sit with in church, and you're like, listen, when brother so-and-so, no names here, when brother so-and-so catches me after church, it just takes every ounce of energy I got to talk to him. He just gets on my every last nerve. If you've got a church like that, then good. Because you're being formed spiritually. Because those same annoying people who sometimes do and say stuff you disagree with will be the first people to show up at your house with a casserole when you have a baby. And they'll be the first people to stand in line at the funeral home when your uncle died, and they'll stand 2 hours in line, and they didn't even know your uncle. But they know you, and they just want to come and say, I'm sorry. They'll be the first people to walk across the church and grab your hand and say, let's go pray. Because I know what you're going through, and I just want to pray with you this morning. There'll be the people that say, hey, I want to help. I know what you're trying to do. I know you're trying to change your life. I know you're trying to get clean, get sober, to whatever it is you're trying to do. I just want to help you. I just want to walk with you in that. Because we don't do any of that stuff alone. We do that together. We do that in community. And we need that kind of community. We need those kind of people in our lives. We need to be those type of people. I don't think Jesus intended us to follow him alone. He intended us to follow him together. And we need one another together to make it happen. It's the only, because some days I'm going to feel good and I can walk on my own. And some days I'm going to need some encouragement. Some days I might need a kick in the butt. Some days I might need, hey, you come on now, you can do this. I'll close with this. I'll kind of explain it this way. 2 hours before our service last night, so we had a Saturday night service, right? And we go to a lot of effort to make the church look perfect on Easter. I'm just going to give you the inside secret. I don't know why we do that, honestly. But we want to, hey, can you mow right before Easter Sunday and make sure that the grass is looking good? Let's plant some new flowers right before Easter Sunday. Let's make sure we're looking real good. Let's spruce everything up. Let's get everything clean. Whatever we need to fix, we're going to fix. Because we want the church looking good on Easter Sunday. I guess we think if you come and you go, wow, it's a really nice building, I guess we'll come back next Sunday. Nobody does that, right? We ain't pressing anybody. But we decided to redo our bathrooms. And we thought, let's do it right before Easter Sunday. Because that way they'll be looking good. They were looking old. It's been 10 years since we redone our bathrooms. We'll have them looking good right before Easter Sunday. So Tim hired somebody. Tim's our executive pastor. So he handles the building and staff and all that. He hired somebody to redo the bathrooms. Well, he texted me 2 hours before service. He said, hey, there was a bit of a mix-up. And I guess he thought we needed them before Sunday. He didn't know about the Saturday service, so they're not going to be ready for Saturday service. I said, that's no problem. He said, I'll text him, make sure he's going to get them done before tomorrow morning. And then he texted me about 15 seconds later, and he said, hey, he's not coming till Monday. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry, but it's not going to get fixed till Monday. And I said, that's fine. It's no big deal. Tim said, I'll take the stuff off the floor, and I'll take the tape off. I'll make it look as good as I can, but it's obviously going to look like it's not finished. And I said, that's no big deal. We'll be fine. He said, I'll put a sign on the door. So Tim put a sign on the door. And I didn't see what he put until after Saturday night service. So after Saturday night service, I'm headed to my office, and I'm about to leave, and I walk by, and this is the sign on the door. Thanks for your patience. Please come in while we are making improvements. Is that not the perfect metaphor for church? That's what we're doing. The church is a group of people who believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. And if Jesus was raised from the dead, then he must be Lord. And if he's Lord, then I need to submit my life to him. And I need to make some improvements. It means that I need to be a better husband. I need to be a better father. I need to be a better friend. I need to be a better human being. There's areas I got to work on. Because if Jesus is Lord of my life, I need to fully submit every area of my life to him. And I don't fully submit every area of my life. And I've got stuff to do. I'm making improvements. And I got a group of people who are doing that. Like we're all together because we all say, yeah, we believe in Jesus too. And we know that we need to be better spouses and better parents and better friends and better human beings. And we'd like to help we're trying to make those same improvements. And so what we say to those who aren't a part of that fellowship is, please come in. We're making improvements. We'd love to have you. Just be patient with us because we're not going to do it perfectly. But we would love to have you be a part of that community. So that's my challenge and my encouragement to you on Easter. And I know we got to go home. I'm getting hungry too. Find you a faith community to be involved in somewhere. It may not be this one. You may think our worship is too out there. You may think it's not out there enough. Okay? So you may think, our preaching's too whatever. Whatever it is, it may not be us. That's totally fine. But just find you one somewhere that you think, you know, these people, they seem to be trying to follow Jesus, and they're trying to practice good faith, and they're still in process. They ain't finished yet, but neither am I, so maybe I'll check out them and be a part of them. Let's pray together. Father, I'm thankful that we have Easter Sunday. It is good to pause once a year and just really focus in on the resurrection. And we know that because of the resurrection, you've empowered us or embodied us to live different lives. And I pray you help us to do that. It's not easy to live different lives. When you call us to be more loving and more kind and more peaceful and more gentle and more faithful and more self-controlled, there's always something working against that. And so I pray that you help us to submit our lives to you and your Holy Spirit, and also to submit our lives to one another as we try to do this together. And I just pray that you be with this church and be with all the churches across this county and across this state and across this country that are just trying to follow you to the best of their ability. Be with them and strengthen them. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus, I pray these things. Amen. Last thing, I know you're about to get up. Last thing. Next Sunday, I'm starting a new series. If you do decide you want to come back to this church, I'm starting a new series, and it's going to be about the Bible. And the Bible is the most cherished book of all time, but it's also one of the most confusing books of all time, because there's all this conflicting advice and all these ancient books written thousands of years ago, and what does it all mean? And so we're going to start working through the Bible. We'll go through Genesis to Revelation in 7 weeks, and we're just going to try to put together the big picture. Here's how it all ties together. Here's what it all means. This is what the Bible is trying to do. So that's what we're starting next Sunday. I hope you can be a part of it. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Easter weekend and a great rest of spring break and a great Mule Day, and we'll see you right after Mule Day. Okay? Thanks for being here.